So thank you all for being here this morning. I've been, quite excited to be a part of this for a while. I'm talking with Renew for a few months now, but funny, she didn't mention that I would be the 9 a.m. Monday morning slot until last week-ish. So I think on Saturday I realized, I'll have to get a little bit more caffeinated. So I'm excited to kick us off with a little bit of information. I'll probably talk for about 8 to 10 minutes, and wanted to really talk to you about two things today. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about JetBlue Ventures and the macro environment in which we're operating that not only sets the stage for why we are investing in travel startups, but it also can set the stage a bit for also why we are all here today at this conference. Then I'd also like to then spend a few minutes just telling you a bit more on where we see the macro environment and the major shifts with technologies and how we look at that impacting travel both today and later down the road. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So talk to you a little bit more about JetBlue Ventures. Innovation is disrupting the Fortune 500. Only 61 companies, which is 12%, that were on that list 50 years ago are still around today. And if we look at the top global companies in 2007, they were companies that we know what they did. We understood their assets. You can kind of measure them. They're names that we all recognize and still know. But if you look in 2017, a decade later, those names are totally different. That was at the end of 2017, and this is obviously very different companies at this point. But I've been updating these slides all the way to last week, and two major changes have happened. Obviously, on the latter part, Facebook has dropped off based on some of the concerns in the tech world around data security. So their stock, I think, is about 9% down, which drops them off the top 5. Tencent, which owns WeChat, is now taking its place. And then I was basically updating Alphabet and Amazon every single day and just decided I'd put them next to each other, which is the first time Amazon has passed Google ever. Was about 2 to 3 weeks ago. And obviously this reflects the changing nature that we're all in. If we see large companies like this changing in nature on a day-to-day basis, what does that mean for us who may or may not be at more cutting edge? We look at a very evolving startup scene. And what's interesting is you can actually look at what's happening in the Valley and start to see what will start to hit mainstream about 3 to 5 years later. So if we look at the rise of social in 2004 to 2006, then we saw that hit mainstream in about 2010. Similar for the next wave of innovation with on-demand and the sharing economy. We saw the rise of Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, et cetera, 2008 to 10, again, really hitting mainstream in 13 to 15. So what does that mean for us now? That means that we have a lot of acronyms to keep memorizing. Artificial intelligence, IoT, augmented reality. These are the innovations that have been happening right now, and these are the ones that we can expect to hit mainstream in 2020 and beyond. And that means then that we should be investing our resources today within travel in these areas specifically. I think what's interesting is that JetBlue is not the only one that's aware of this innovation. Half of all US billion-dollar startups, or unicorns as they're termed affectionately out here, are backed by a corporate VC, which is the investment arm of a corporation. And that leads us to where JetBlue Ventures is. We're out here in Silicon Valley. I've already been asked a couple times today, wait, but JetBlue's in New York. I think you can't really drive innovation per se if you're sitting on floor 5 of the corporate headquarters. So we purposely came out here and set up about 2 years ago. And our mission is to incubate, invest in, and partner with early stage travel startups at the intersection of travel, technology, and hospitality. And so that's namely not when you sit down in the airplane and then until you land, right? Because when we travel, all of us travel to get here either through flights or even the transfer for those who live in the city, that we're still the same customer, be it a ground transportation, airport, airline, et cetera. So how do we treat our customers as an industry as the same person? So with just a couple other minutes, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This session is let's talk about the customer journey. We're looking at a very different world than we have been with the customer. So if we look through a typical kind of travel stage journey, right? 5 steps: explore, compare, book, experience, and share. Across a number of decades, it looks fundamentally different today. You know, in the 1990s, it was, you'd walk in, it was a physical building, everything was booked for you with a travel agent. You fast forward to 2010, we had swung to the entirely different direction with a DIY travel, right? Where we as consumers wanted to plan every single piece of the trip. And so now that really raises the question, where are we going to be in 2025? And how do we look at some of those innovations that are happening today farther down the road? And how can we start to look at how are we going to explore where to go, what our options are? The actual booking and the experience is absolutely different. I'll say that there are really 3 things that are driving it. And it sounds like based on what Renu was talking about and Susan as well, you know, I think data is not a shift, it's not a new thing, and it's certainly not per se a technology. But I reiterate it every time I talk about this because we as travel are not great at it. We have a lot of customer data either in old ossified tech stacks, in silos, or we don't know who our customers are. And it drives absolutely everything that will happen going forward. And if we don't have data on our customers and our products as travel suppliers and travel players, we're not going to be able to leverage any of the technologies or the digital revolution that's following after this. This is a lot of stats. My favorite one's actually the first one, which is the idea that there is more data that's been created in the past 2 years than of all of history. And that just helps to give a scope for it because that's only going to continue to accelerate. And if we aren't prepared now, imagine the magnitude of effort that shift is going to take for us to get prepared in 2 to 3 years when it's only continued to be an ever increasing amount. So with data, right, we have it, you know, the definition of data is really data pieces. It's not per se information. How do we turn it into information once we have it? That's with artificial intelligence. And, you know, there's a quote, the late Stephen Hawking said that AI could spell the end of the human race. And there's lots of fairly dire things about artificial intelligence, but I'm a venture capitalist, not a futurist, so I think about how I can make money for it in the next 2 to 5 years. And really with artificial intelligence, that's about adding information to the data, right? And it's looking at understanding and projecting based on who I am, what am I likely to do, and how can I target and personalize offers to my consumers based on that. And again, it all starts with having that data that we have as our information. And the last one, and this is one I'm particularly keen on, is the rise of voice. And I think we're going to talk a bit more about this in the panel. But voice fundamentally shifts everything within travel, in my opinion. And you know, I think Mary Meeker, one of my favorite researchers, does some phenomenal information about the rise of voice. And they're projecting by 2020, about 30% of searches will be on voice. And actually, Andrew Ng, the chief scientist of Baidu, expects that 50% of searches after 2020 and 2022 will actually be through either speech or image. 50% will not be web-based, typed out searches. And that means a lot for our industry because what does it look like today on desktop with digital advertising? That's the entire first page of search results when I Googled San Francisco hotels. In mobile, it looks the majority of either the web screen or the app. And you know, this Priceline and Expedia were about $5.9 billion in digital ad spending in 2016, which based on how you kind of measure it, is about approximately 10% of Google's revenue. So where does $5.9 billion go in voice? And when we move from a world of results to recommendations, how do you make money and how do things get booked? And if I say, Alexa, book Hotel Nico for me, where does that booking go through? Does it go through an intermediary? Does it go through a .com? Or does it not go through anything at all? So just imagine a world to wrap up where you explore options by getting suggested a new hotel for your leisure trip in 2019. You're woken up with it each morning with a new kind of destination you might go to on your smartwatch. You then search for options for your business trip. You don't even have to really look at what options you might need, but I simply schedule a meeting in LA and my trip is automatically booked for me with 2 suggestions on people I should meet while I'm down there, and an experience where I can communicate with any travel provider in any channel of means, and my communication is probably as well answered for me by an AI. So that pretty much is everything, but I suggest that as we look to the travel journey, it looks a lot different than it did in 1990 and 2010. Thanks.